the nature of the relationship between a patient and its payer, the insurance company, sometimes is fraught with tension, and there's not always like an eagerness to interact with. And we found that sitting in this DME role was sort of this unique intersection where a variety of products, a variety of experiences with different products is something that we had insight to. The trust from the patient being focused on the quality of the services was something that we could build on.
What does the future of DME look like from the seat of a CTO?
I think this is a great time to be alive. We're getting to do things that 10 or 15 years ago we couldn't have even dreamed of. And if you look now at some of the capabilities with AI, there's a whole new world that's open to us.
Obviously, there's certain healthcare organizations, some are better than others at sort of adopting technology successfully. What do you think separates those two?
One of the things that I appreciate about what we're doing is that we are an organization big enough to have certain resources to make things happen. When we're talking about all of this agentic work or some of the other AI that we've done, it is truly integrated into our enterprise workflows.
Okay, we are live on the #1 DME podcast, Claim to Fame. Today we have a very special guest today, Richard Mackey from CCS Medical. Welcome to the show, Richard.
Thanks, Alex. Happy to be here.
Welcome, Richard.
Awesome.
Thanks for the time.
Thank you.
So usually the way we start this whole thing off is just giving you a little opportunity to tell our listeners a little bit about who you are and a little bit about what you do.
Yes, thanks. It's great to be here. Appreciate it. Wayne and Alex. My background, my name is Richard Mackey. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for CCS Medical. CCS has been in business for over 30 years, traditionally as a DME or historically as a DME, and more recently broadening capabilities and services to be more of a chronic care management company. And I'm sure we'll be able to talk about that later. But my background, I'm almost my entire career have been in the healthcare industry with a brief stint in consulting, but having focused almost exclusively on technology, especially in the last 15 plus years, various technology leadership roles for a variety of healthcare companies, and specifically quite a bit with data and analytics. So that's an area that I enjoy, being able to innovate and derive, higher value offerings based on some of those capabilities. So look forward to talking about all of that and happy to be here today.
Awesome, Richard. Excited for the conversation as well. And kind of, as you mentioned, you've spent your career in, healthcare technology, data, now AI, through digital transformation. A lot of these conversations we have, most people in DME are trying to figure out what health tech looks like in the next 5 years from now. You're one of the individuals that's actually building it. So I think we should start there. And what does the future of DME look like from the seat of a CTO?
Yeah, kind of as you're alluding to, Wayne, you might have heard this from some of your other practitioners, but I think this is a great time to be alive. We're getting to do things that 10 or 15 years ago we couldn't have even dreamed of, and if you look now at some of the capabilities with AI, there's a whole new world that's open to us. In particular, for healthcare companies, we have so much unstructured data and content that historically didn't fit into a spreadsheet or, was otherwise more structured and refined. I think this is why you see such a big adoption in a variety of healthcare providers, practitioners, actors in the healthcare industry have really embraced what some of these capabilities are, because it fits and suits the needs of how we have historically run our business. So that's very exciting, I think. When you think about like DME specifically, and some of our view of how AI fits in is that it's an opportunity to take interactions and conversations and to digitize those, and then to be able to bring insights forward in a routine, not necessarily always predictable because it's not the way that it was before, but in ways that we now have learned to be able to refine those outcomes and make sure that the value is being delivered in a way that's appropriate for a regulated industry and predictable outcomes from that standpoint. So I think the fun part is we get to do and go after all kinds of interactions and conversations with a variety of settings in the industry, and we are able to drive value. So the DME of the past, right, is important to deliver a product, deliver a service on time to the patient in their home. But this opportunity allows us to do it in a very different way. And so much of what had been reliant on humans or on people to be able to capture and record different parts of that interaction and move it across. We were always like constrained by how fragmented or disconnected certain systems would be. Now we have a big opportunity to be able to further connect systems, be able to add value in ways that before we couldn't even entertain, right? And now all of that's possible. So I think that's a lot of how the industry itself changes in the next 5 years based on what we can do now.
Absolutely.
And Richard, I was kind of curious, you spent your time at Philips and Accenture and now CCS. What kind of like originally attracted you to healthcare technology?
Well, probably like many of us, I think that working in healthcare is a unique thing in that it affects all of us, and the opportunity to be able to deliver better healthcare for all of us as consumers of healthcare or members of our family that are consumers. We've all been in those positions where a family member is dealing with something unexpected, or it might be yourself, right? And you see firsthand that it's great care. At least, most of us are able to have access to great care here in the US, but it could be so much better. And we see that ourselves, or we see that through family members. So I think what's always attracted me to healthcare is that whether it's in a global pharmaceutical company, a medical device company, a provider, right, it's the opportunity to be able to help the person who's receiving that have a better experience, have a better outcome. And I think it's sort of for me, it feels very much a part of like a life's calling, that if you can be a part of delivering that or making that better for somebody, you can work hard and work long hours in any kind of job or industry, but when you can do that and it makes an impact, I mean, there's no better impact you could have than to have somebody have a more fulfilling, enriched, healthier life. And so for me, that's always been what helps to motivate me to get up and to work long hours and to put in the extra miles for that sort of purpose.
Yeah, couldn't agree more, Richard. It's helpful to think about at the end of all of this, there's a patient at the end of the tunnel, right? That all of this
Exactly.
trickles down to. So it's definitely, a lot of passionate people in DME. I think, at least the guests that come on our podcast will resonate with that. And, definitely feel very strongly like at the end of the day, it's, you get to work on these exciting and tough projects, but it's very rewarding because there's, a human being at the end of it. That being said, for those that are actually unfamiliar with CCS, can you explain what your organization does and the role it plays in chronic disease management?
Sure. So the organization's been around for over 30 years and historically has been in the DME setting, providing a variety of goods and services to patients, largely in their home setting. So these often, and a majority of the work that we do, are for folks that are managing diabetes. And so this will be things from blood glucose monitors to continuous glucose monitors to a variety of other products or services related to managing diabetes. And we'll do everything from provide or distribute the product that person has agreed to as part of their care plan to them in their homes. But increasingly, we'll also provide additional services to those patients to help them manage the condition. So it could be things like receiving coaching services or support from a certified clinician who's able to help that person over a series of interactions over time, be able to manage their condition, but also use the device in question. And some of the other analytics that we've developed help to understand who may be at risk of not continuing to use their CGM device after a period of time. So it's increasingly CGMs are an example of something that's become a standard of care, but there are a certain subset of the group that receive them that struggle or it might not be as easy to continue to use it over time. And so those are examples of some of the other services and products that we've developed that allow us to help patients manage the entire, condition itself, as opposed to just receive a product in a box for a period of time, and have the interaction be more limited. And so that's a bit of who we are and where we've evolved over time.
Yeah, and CCS is sort of like evolved, right? Beyond just simply shipping supplies. And it seems like a lot of organizations, at least ones that we speak to that do have some sort of like online sales, e-commerce sort of perspective in their business line, they all seem to try to want to have this sort of like more Amazon experience, more intelligent experience where it's not just, you buy something, you receive it. How would you kind of describe this like sort of transformation you guys are going through now?
Yeah, it's a great question, Alex. I think that for us, we've had this history of being in business for a while. We're not brand new. We've been around for decades. And so there are a number of strong relationships that we have with people that have been working with us. I mentioned a couple of the kinds of devices that people are using, and there are those and others as well, right? And so over time, those relationships with the patients have become very important. And as a result of a number of different interactions, we have data and insights around that relationship over time. We can see how it evolves. We can see what's important to one person may be more or less important than to somebody else. And so for us, it's around the patient. Everything wraps around the patient and it centers on the patient. And our ability to work with a lot of data that we've had in our systems to be able to then help understand what they might need or might not need, like, and be able to anticipate that. That's been a big part of our transformation. AI has gotten a lot of attention over the last couple of years, but even before that, we were working more with the machine learning AI, some of those structured quantitative data points that I was talking about at the start, like that's where we began our journey. And I think to your point, a lot of organizations have different strengths or weaknesses. In our case, we found that the history of the relationships that we have with the patient and the fact that we had been serving those patients for that length of time, like we have a lot of pride in the quality of our service, the human interaction that we have with patients. In some instances, we will interact with the patient more often, more regularly through the course of the year than maybe even with their own provider, right? And the nature of the relationship between a patient and its payer, the insurance company, sometimes is fraught with tension, and there's not always like an eagerness to interact with those folks, right? So care plans or care offerings that come from the payer side have their own challenges. And we found that sitting in this DME role was sort of this unique intersection where a variety of products, a variety of experiences with different products is something that we had insight to. The trust from the patient being focused on the quality of the services was something that we could build on. And with that historical depth of data is what really made the difference for us to be able to cultivate something that we think is unique, kind of first in the industry. And more important than being first was the fact that it's of high quality, that it, is very accurate and very able to help understand what somebody might need in advance of them needing it or at the right time when they need it. And I think those are the elements, Alex, to your point, that helped us start down that path to be able to, do more or offer more to a patient for better outcomes.
Right. Richard, that's really interesting. And, you mentioned leveraging this data. How are you seeing, or how has the patient's expectations changed compared to, let's say, 5 or 10 years ago?
Yeah, I would say that there's an appreciation. So my or quicker answer to this, Wayne, would be that I think there's an increased sophistication.
Yeah.
Sometimes when we started this work 5+ years back, we would have discussions around, we do a lot of business with folks that might be post-retirement or in retirement, right? And so some folks would say, look, if you're older, using a cell phone is a struggle, right? Or my grandparent doesn't use it, right? We would have discussions like that 5+ years ago. And now nobody even brings that up any longer, right? Like our folks that are in this demographic are more accustomed to using these devices perhaps than some others, right? But the level of sophistication beyond just can somebody use a tool to access some info, the appreciation for a more sophisticated approach or more intelligent approach, I think is increasingly there. I think people are very comfortable talking about AI. I don't know about you all, but we've talked about here with healthcare, where I just did now about grandparents. I've seen some of the people in my life and my family that are older come to have an appreciation for AI that is bigger than mine, whether it's dealing with Alexa or Siri or what have you, right? And so this idea that I can benefit from these kinds of services in a variety of ways, and I have the expectation that people can do that or will do that, I think is there. So, interestingly for us, the reception to these kinds of services has been very strong, right?
Yeah,
in fact,
that's
in some cases, people surprisingly react in a positive way, like even more so that, there's some examples on the other side too, but I think to your point, like there is an expectation that you're doing more than just putting something in a box and sending it, right? There's the expectation that there will be more there.
For sure. I tell people, so, as part of like the Nico Health software offering, we do have some digital tools for resupply for patients, right? And, some people are kind of in your camp where it's, pretty obvious and they see this. Some people need a little convincing, but, I would say my grandma's 91. She FaceTimes me all the time. So it's, if she can do it, I think anyone can. But it's definitely true. They become, I think, the expectations and their adoption is much higher than probably a lot of people even realize who may not see it, firsthand.
Right.
Yeah, I was going to mention something similar to that, where when we were talking about resupply and trying to make sure that people understand, yes, elderly people do actually use phones. And we saw this, I think it was like a study from AARP saying, I think over 90% of people that are over the age of 75 are actually using phones, and probably usually smartphones, because they're actually easier to use. Anyways,
Exactly.
you can see the screen, you can make the font bigger. It's not, like the old school flip phones or something like that, where you have a little, analog screen or something. So it's interesting to see this whole thing kind of grow. And when we were talking about like a great digital patient experience, what does that actually look like in your case, you think?
For us, we have a complete kind of digital ecosystem where it's not just about some of the services that we're talking about. It's about our, portal, around our interactions, texts and emails, and increasingly with our CC offering, we've got capabilities to have live conversations take place, right? And so that digital ecosystem is not just one channel, but it's a variety of channels that is able to interact with a patient over time across any and all of those, so it's not quite like omni-channel from the marketing standpoint, but from the point of view of a patient experience, the journey of that from start to finish varies over time, and it's able to interact and integrate across a variety of channels over time. So when we develop solutions, we're looking at that experience from start to finish and understanding that some people prefer some more than others. So for example, in our predictive platform, we're trying, we talked before about CGM, but as many as 40% of people that will be prescribed this therapy struggle to stay on it for a variety of reasons. And so part of the value of the program that we have is to understand the complexity of those and to try to interact and work with people in different ways. So there are folks that we think, are for a variety of reasons are more pressed for time and value being able to interact with quick SMS kind of interactions and exchanges more so than like a voice conversation, right? And things like that. And then alternatively, we have others that prefer that, like for some of the reasons that we talked about. Maybe it's an SDOH activity around loneliness. And there are some folks that either prefer to speak with somebody in the postal service or prefer to speak to somebody in a voice interaction. That could be an agent, a human agent. It could be an AI agent. They prefer that kind of interaction because they get more out of it. It's deeper, it's richer for them. They have more time to invest in it. And so we develop the alternatives, the solutions that are not just about the channel, but also about the motivations, the parts of why somebody might seek out one channel versus the other. And then we customize the content for that interaction. So for us, hopefully that answers your question. For us, that kind of patient digital experience is not just one thing, but it's a multitude of channels, and then making the content specific for that person based on what they might be after, what matters to them, and what will likely, motivate them the most is what we go for.
Interesting.
Mhm.
Where do you see the biggest inefficiencies that still exist within the DME and chronic care management space?
I think it's mostly around the fragmentation. I think we have regulation in our industry. We also have a variety of actors in different roles. And I think, the kinds of constant things that we've talked about over the years, over the decade, about having systems that are disparate and not always integrated and being able to integrate more workflow. I think that's a lot of what we go after, and trying to make that becomes difficult for the patient when there's those disconnects, right? And so I think trying to be able to simplify, integrate as much as possible. I think many of our new AI tools, again, as I mentioned, I think there's a lot of strong adoption in healthcare, like, compared to some of the other trends that we've seen in the past where healthcare will adopt later or take a wait and see approach. I think we're seeing something very different here. And I believe it's largely because a lot of these approaches help us to defragment those like disconnected, disparate systems.
Yeah, definitely a lot of
So
fragmentation, even in our corner of DME. So it does present a lot of opportunity for technology compared to things in the past, right? So I couldn't agree more with that.
Question about AI. Were you at MedTrade by any chance?
I personally was not. We had members of our team that were there, but I was not.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, so I mean, whether it's MedTrade or really any conference, what we're starting to hear a lot about is everyone's really talking about AI, of course. And I was curious on your take about what do you think in this space is kind of like real versus hype when it comes to AI itself?
I think what's real is, we have so much that's conversational. We have so much that is deriving insights or takeaways. Like if you think about the whole, all of the digital scribes, the AI scribes, if you think about all that,
Hmm.
right? Like the patient and the provider, there's so much value that has come from that, right? And there's been such strong adoption by all parties involved, right? And that's changed a lot. So I think that's very real and relevant. And there are many examples in our organization where we have, for all the reasons I mentioned, these really strong, relationships that we have with patients. Like there's so many examples of where we're getting benefit by being able to let folks focus on the conversation and let the, documentation and the takeaways and the next steps, right? We still have humans in the loop to make sure that nothing gets missed or lost, but we can give you all the data to show how much more efficient we are by deploying these tools. I think I wouldn't call it myself, I wouldn't call it hype, but I would say the the opportunity we see now is around agentic, and we're investing in agentic to be able to help us interact with patients to understand what they need, to do things like move orders forward, be able to receive consent. A good example of where we have certain requirements in our industry to receive that consent. If we were drop shipping, on an autofill kind of sequence, we wouldn't need to invest in some of these interactions, but we do. And so because of that, it's really important to understand the intent appropriately. It's really important to be able to build and deploy these systems in a way that even though they're like, non-deterministic, that there are the appropriate guardrails in place, that the results, the outcomes of those interactions are as expected without any error, right? And so I think it's not hype, but I think that's the places where you have to invest in the right way to make sure that the result is what you need. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And also, it also got me thinking kind of the flip side. Which functions do you think will kind of always require human touch?
Well, I think the big thing that we all talk about is the clinical kind of aspect to this, right? So what we are not doing today is replacing clinicians or clinical interactions. We are handling pieces that are more administrative, with our work, frankly. And even in those, as I mentioned, often or in most cases, we have human in the loop kind of interactions to make sure. So I think those are the pieces where personally, I don't know that I know others see a world where that, like, even on the clinical side, we get there, and that may happen in the future, but I don't see that happening in the near future, at least not as in the way that we envision it. These are not diagnostic services that we're providing. These are tools that allow us to streamline and make more efficient the interactions that we have with patients, so that we can invest more time into those kind of more diagnostic clinical coaching experiences that we talked about earlier.
Richard, I was just kind of thinking, obviously there's certain healthcare organizations, some are better than others at sort of adopting technology successfully. What do you think separates those two? Why are some way better at having these technology, technological experiences much more than others?
I think it's a really important question, because I think that's gets to the crux of all this. One of the
Hmm.
things that I appreciate about what we're doing is that we are an organization big enough to have certain resources to make things happen, but we're also not so big that we have there are some large organizations that I've been a part of, or that other, we can point to, that'll have multiple large enterprise systems. And and so I think with a variety of tools and platforms, like when we're talking about all of this agentic work or some of the other AI that we've done, it is truly integrated into our enterprise workflows, right? It's like, every call, or the vision of every call, even though it may not be there at the moment, the vision of every call, every interaction, like happening in a certain way. That's easier when you don't have multiple platforms that are running around the world, with different versions or different, right? So some of the
Hmm.
harmonization in systems, the larger you get, the more difficult that is to do. I think you benefit when you have kind of a more singular or certain solutions in certain parts of the environment. I think that helps you. And then I think the converse of that, outside of just being able to execute against systems, I think it's the organizational willingness to try new things, right? Like I think it's not about, people often talk about failing quickly, right? For me, it's not as much about that. It's more about stage gate kind of product and solution development. I think that's something where when you get that right and you're successful there, you're kind of constantly investing and growing and deploying in a way that you have people on board. But to your point, make no mistake, right? It is very, in larger organizations where there's a lot of different points of view, maintaining that alignment, right? And keeping, because even in organizations our size or smaller, you'll always have this sort of change management need to align all of the, influence and align all of the people that have a vested interest in whether this works or doesn't work, right? And that is probably we always joke, right? The computers are the easy part, right? The humans are the hard part, right? And that's, I think, from the point of view of being successful in driving that change through an organization, I think that's where you have to focus as much as on the systems themselves.
Yep. I like that. Kind of from your side, Richard, what conversations are healthcare leaders like yourself having behind closed doors that aren't really making headlines or maybe top of the mind for everyone else?
I don't know. I think that's a good question. I think we're questions that we have a lot or that we go through a lot and we benefit from our advisors and are just sort of you see a lot of contradictory things in the general press, right? Like your thing was, what are people talking about that isn't in the press? But if you just think about things that are in the press, right? We see as much about data centers everywhere. Yesterday on the radio, the big tech giants can't invest enough. Every dollar they have and then some are going into new data centers. And then in the same day, you're seeing articles from some of the same publications talk about missed expectations, failed AI deployments, not getting as much out of AI as what was thought earlier. And I think I don't know that it's so much like backroom discussions. I think for me, a lot of times where I spend time is trying to reconcile a lot of the positive or the negative kind of take on what's happening and how people are deploying it. And I think, especially for healthcare, for all the reasons we said, this is the most important work any of us could do. The last thing anyone wants is to make a big bet or a big gamble on something as important as somebody's like healthcare. So we have to get it right. And I think that's where people spend a lot of time. At least that's where I spend a lot of time publicly and privately with a lot of our advisors, talking about ways to bring this forward that is successful the first time. But a lot of that is in, I think, kind of scaling and in the product development stage gate process to make sure that the larger scaling, works the way it's intended to.
Got it.
Great
It's
answer.
really interesting. Thank you.
It's funny that you brought up the whole thing about data centers. And I was just reading recently how now they're trying to put data centers like on the side of people's houses. So you can actually get paid to have a data center like in your backyard. And then they're also looking to put like data centers in the ocean. So the waves can basically propel it and keep it moving while keeping the ocean water makes it like cool down. It's pretty interesting stuff. I don't know how far it's going to go in the next few years, but I'm sure over time we'll probably start seeing them all over the place.
It is fascinating. I'll have to dig more into the one in your own backyard. I think that's
You get paid for it
too. Yeah,
I know. I was like, I might think about that. Put on top of my roof or something. Might burn down. I'm in Arizona though. It's like 200 degrees up there.
Right. You may not be in a good spot. For
Yeah. Right. Exactly. So, Richard, I do want to ask one more question. What makes someone successful in healthcare technology today, in your opinion?
I think it's an opportunity to be able to synthesize quickly information. I think what makes the industry so fulfilling, all the reasons we talked about, but also the importance of the regulatory compliance. Those are aspects that are very unique to us in healthcare. And I think it's somebody who can operate or understand the needs and the incentives of various actors or various agents in the process, whether it's DME, HME, chronic care management, whether it's payers, providers, things like that, right? Like I think it's being able to understand those pieces and then understanding the value of the regulatory and compliance component. I think those are parts where when you look at how we can do things in different ways, the important thing is to innovate and streamline, but also to respect and honor, of course, like the approach to how the industry functions. And I think that's very unique here versus working in some other industries.
Totally. Thanks for that.
All right, Richard, we made it to our rapid fire section. It's quick and fun, basically kind of like a this or that. You ready to jump into it?
Let's do it.
These are the hard part's over. So the first one is iPhone or Android?
iPhone.
ChatGPT or Claude?
Claude.
Work from home or office?
Probably office.
Window seat or aisle?
Aisle.
The favorite piece of technology you ever personally owned?
My Palm Pilot that had the back in the day that had the restaurant and city directory for Manhattan on it. I thought it was amazing
awesome.
to me then and blew my mind. And now I laugh about that, but that's the truth.
That's awesome. If you weren't in healthcare technology, what would you be doing?
Well, that's a good one. I don't know. I maybe play pickleball. I don't know. I don't have a good answer for that one.
That's awesome. And last one, if AI could do one household chore forever for you, what would you choose?
Laundry.
Great
Boom.
one too.
Richard,
Awesome,
thanks so
Richard.
much for joining
That's all.
today.
That's
Yeah.
all.
If anyone wants to
I
reach
really
out to
appreciate-
you or find out more information about you, Richard, where could someone like find out more about your company, what you guys do?
We're at ccsmed.com.
Perfect. Well, thanks so much. This was a lot of fun. Really appreciate your time.
Really appreciate it. We have an AI section too at ccsmed.com if you want to hear, if anybody wants to hear more about some of the initiatives that we talked about. But to both of you, I really appreciate your time to talk here. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Have a good one, sir.
Thanks, guys.